Welcome
All
to
right.
the Drupal usability meeting for Friday, December 18th, 2020. This is the last meeting we'll have for a few weeks because the next two scheduled dates would be Christmas and New Year's Day. And on the meeting are me, Benji Fisher, and Ted Bowman, Emily Nouveau, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, and Laurie Escola. And take it away, either Ted or Emily.
Sure, I'll give a intro. I guess y'all can see my screen, right?
Yes.
So we have this automatic update module in Contrib that does non-composer based updates for Drupal 7 and Drupal 8. Emily has been working on mockups for UX improvements. We're moving some of the functionality into Drupal core. The one that I'm sort of was interested in getting UX feedback on was this create, update, and readiness checks. And basically if we look at the contrib module, basically, if you're going to update in the report, in the status report, there'll be a new section that says you're ready for updates or you're not ready for updates, and give you reasons. So this is the contrib module, and there's just tons of messages. This is a case where I've forced a couple errors, like the web root cannot be located, and then some errors where it's finding a difference between files and what it expects. The actual differences, the actual messages in the core module would probably be different. We'd check different things, but we may still have some checkers that have a lot of messages. So obviously this like blows up the contrib module or blows up the status report. And then the other thing on admin pages up at the top in the contrib module, it also puts out these messages. So it doesn't really discriminate between, it doesn't give you a nice summary. I guess the point is on the putting on every admin top page is that if I think in the testing of the contrib module, they didn't find cases where they had so many messages, but it is possible. So they were probably thinking about situations like this. And actually, now that I see it, there's two things that the contrib module is putting out, and we were sort of going to discuss one of them. So sorry, I can't. I can probably get rid of these, but for the purposes of this one, of this meeting, we're looking at these messages. So another thing it does is it displays critical advisories, but we're doing those in separate issues. But I think the contrib module is thinking that the messages would be sort of like a couple messages, and not thinking that there would be tons. And the contrib module and the core patch also both have the concept of warnings and errors. And warnings for the purposes of update checkers is basically readiness checkers. Is if you get a warning, it's telling you, this might have a problem. This might cause a problem when the automatic update is tried. The errors mean that an automatic update won't even be attempted. So I guess in this case, like if the web root can't be located, obviously it's not going to even attempt an update. But say if you have a file size, if you only have a certain amount, or your disk space is getting low, it may still attempt the update and then try to do a rollback if the update is not completed. So that is sort of the problem we're trying to tackle. The core patch currently would produce, if there was a checker that had this many messages, it would produce the same kind of screen. Right now, in the core patch, we're only trying to add one checker along with the API to avoid having a huge patch that adds 10 checkers. So the core patch won't produce these long messages only because the particular checker that we're adding is a disk space check, and it's just going to say you have low disk space. So it's not going to produce tons, but we want to assume that either core or contrib might add checkers that add a lot of messages. So I guess I will pass it over to Emily.
Okay, thanks. Here I'll show. Oh, okay. There we go. Okay. Can everyone see this?
Yes, and let me just, for the sake of the recording, mention that we've been joined by Paul Driver and Thomas Howell. Thanks for hopping on the call.
Yep, thanks.
Okay. So the issue of having many warnings essentially taking over a whole page. It seems like the best way to fix that is going to be, there we go, to condense these down into one error message that then links to the status report page. So this would just say that your site does not pass some readiness checks, and then condense down all of the error messages to one that essentially summarizes what the error message is. So in this case, multiple files appear to have been modified. And so if there was only one file that was modified, it would just display that, that file warning. But if there are multiple, then it displays this with a link. And then updates that include these files will fail and require intervention. So once you would click on the link in, then you'd be taken to the status report where I categorize this under the update status because it seemed to make sense if we could tack onto that, because otherwise we're going to have multiple update statuses on in a row. And then you would get the details element that would be closed initially, but if you wanted to see individual error messages, you can open. That way it doesn't create a scrolling problem for the whole page, but you can go and find which individual file you need to check on. And that that's what I have for messages. So I'm curious what people think of this pattern.
So first, I'm curious, if there are errors, is it reasonable to expect that there will also be lots and lots of warnings?
Not necessarily. And we're not actually sure which checks we're going to put in. So an error could be, we can't find your vendor directory. Oh wait, so what you're saying, like, if we have one error, will it mean we also have tons of warnings?
Yeah, so if the vendor directory can't be found, then I can imagine that there might then be lots and lots of warnings that are really just reflections of that error.
Yeah, I think we will try to avoid that. Like, I think, say if the whole vendor directory can't be located, it seems like one message is sufficient. We're not sure what we're going to do for files that are patched, but let's say the situation where we support the C. Wiggins composer patches module, but maybe we check to see that if you don't have any patches, then the files are what we expect. So if we can locate your vendor directory, but then we also find maybe either a lot of packages missing or a lot of individual files missing, I could imagine that would be a case where we have a bunch of messages about missing files. Does that make sense? Sorry, I cut out for a sec.
Yeah, so you're going to try to avoid the situation I suggested, but it sounds like that's going to rely on the individual checkers trying
Yeah,
to
so
avoid that situation.
yeah, so we could have some situations where we have one short message that's an error and then totally unrelated. So I guess with the maybe we decide that like the disk usage scenario is an error. So we have one error that says this, you don't have enough disk space to perform an update. But then maybe the altered files in your vendor directory as a warning. So we maybe have tons of those. So I think we'll probably can't be sure the combination. There may be like one warning, one error and tons of warnings, or there may be just one error and no warnings. Yeah, so there's a bit of a combination.
Okay, so Emily, could you go back to the mock-up for the warning message?
Yep.
And I think that's a good pattern where the module that we control sort of summarizes things and is the only one that actually adds a message to the page. Keeps it short. Like we don't want a wall of terror right here. But I think that's a good pattern where there's a short message with a link to more information. I'm curious whether that last line of the warning message is actually realistic. Like if it's gathering information from various checkers, is it going to be able to be that specific about what the problem is? But I guess that's an implementation detail.
Well, so yeah, probably it can't. I don't know what Emily, I mean, one thing I thought looking at this is that what if like each checker had a summary option that was like, like if this one, if the file diff checker would do this, but then maybe like the file ownership one would also have another summary, was just like, their file permissions problems with your whatever your vendor directory or something, or there's just file permissions problems. So that might, so then we could, in that case, like if you had a bunch of checkers, you potentially could have a bunch of messages, but not nearly, only one per checker that has a problem. So it's not really likely that you, like every checker would have a problem that you have installed. And if it did, then that is like a really serious problem. So maybe it's okay having like 5 messages there. So we could, I guess, if Emily, if you go back to the status report. So I wonder if that one that collapses could be per checker.
So that it would show, you could dig into each individual item.
Yeah. Because the other thing that would be good for in that case is that I've noticed in the contrib module, like if I force 2 checkers to have a problem, then you just have this big long wall of messages. Like if you look at them and you'd be like, oh, file permissions, I know I have that issue. Maybe what other ones do I have? It's really hard to like scroll down and find, okay, this is when the different type, I think especially if some of them are warning, like let's say the file modification is a warning in that we will attempt to update your site and it may or may not apply, but then something else might be an error.
So we could have nested details elements, couldn't we?
We can do nested details, but in this case, I think it would be better if they're side by side and all closed. Just because it's going to get increasingly difficult, I think, to figure out where you're at.
So we could repeat like the summary message as the collapsed that
Mhm.
was on the other page.
Yeah,
And then
so this
have
one
it,
would say
yeah,
multiple files. Yeah.
and that expand out. The other thing that the contrib module doesn't do well, and it's hard, I guess you have to hit this particular problem, is that you could have, you know, one checker throw errors and one throw warnings. And how the contrib module handles that now is if any of them throw an error, meaning like there's a critical problem with the updates, then it throws it up into the top section. But it kind of throws everything up there. So if you have like an error, one error and 3 warnings, then everything will be in the top section. And you open it up, you know, and you would, I guess in the way that we're talking about, it would be, you know, it would show you all 3 of those summaries, then you open them up. But then you wouldn't necessarily have a really obvious way to say like, oh, these 2 are an error and this 1 is a warning.
Yeah, I think we want to keep the distinction between errors and warnings. Can
So-
you go back again to the message at the top of the page?
Sure.
And sort of standard questions. Does this provide a clear description of what the problem is and what the next step is? And also, does this preserve the distinction between errors and warnings?
So I believe that all of the files warnings are warnings, that there aren't
Yeah,
errors that would appear there.
yeah.
So that would be a warning. So I don't have a mock-up here of what would happen with an error and a warning, but the errors would appear in the error message area.
I mean, I guess my suggestion is that don't put any links in the messages that you're getting from the checkers, like files appears to be a link in the last line. We want just one call to action from this message, which will go to the status report.
Okay, that's what files is meant to do there.
But that message is from the checker that you don't control, isn't it?
That is true. I mean, we control it in the sense, but yeah, but it wouldn't be, if a contrib, we couldn't be sure they put the link in. Yeah, and I guess in this case, if we had 2 checkers that both had things to the status report, then that would, even if they both put the link in, then we'd have 2 links to the same place.
Yeah. So my suggestion is, and I'd like to see if other people agree with this, is limit the number of links, and I think just have one link in this message. And that should be controlled by our module, not by the checkers. And it should make it clear that you're going to the status page where you're going to get more information on the problems.
Okay.
So I would change the text depending on the nature of the failures. It might affect the eligibility for automatic updates. So again, primary questions are we clearly describing what the situation is, and are we clearly indicating the next step? I think the answer to the first one is that we're doing a pretty good job, but for the second step, I want to have one link going to the status report page. Do other people agree, disagree? Oh, and I see that Gabor has joined us. Well, welcome, Gabor.
I think that's a good suggestion. The one thing I think it gets tricky is, say we had just like 2 checkers, 1 an error and 1 a warning. So we'd have warning messages and we have errors. like, where would we put the summary? Like, would we put a summary in just one of them, or yeah, I guess I'm not sure. Or maybe,
Yeah, I would say just have the error message
mhm.
and say there are also warnings, and then all of that information is still going to be on the status report page.
Okay, so but do you think, like, so not put the message for each checker? Not put the summary for each checker? I mean,
No, a summary is okay. I don't know whether I want to list warnings if there are also errors. Maybe, maybe not.
okay, yeah,
But certainly don't have any links in the information coming from checkers. Just have
yeah,
one.
yeah.
But again, I think that you and I and Emily should stop talking for a minute and let other
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
pipe up.
It seems like a reasonable approach that you suggest. I think that multiple links generally implies a high level of understanding of what's in the message. So that's, it really depends on the expected skill level of the individual who's going to read and act upon the message. Simplicity is usually the best bet, but if we feel that this message is only going to be read by a sysadmin or someone of a high skill level, then I'm not as concerned, because someone should be able to read them, but then it has to be very clear what the differing actions are. So like each link needs to be it needs to make sense in its context. It can't just be a link there for the sake of being a link. That's but I mean, simplicity is going to be easier to predict, and in terms of the warnings and versus error messages, um, if they're two distinctly different things, I would want to see that the warnings were there, because there have been instances where I've known about a given error, and I've had to accept it because an update to to a module may not be available, but the warnings are actionable, and I wouldn't want to lose the fact that there was some form of state change, because I'm seeing the same error every time, regardless of what's happening in the background. But again, I don't know if that's actionable, but that's my opinion.
So something I didn't fully follow was what messages are going to be shown if both warnings and errors exist at the same time. Is there going to be two messages, or is there going to be one message?
Right now we have two, so we would have the error messages and we would have separate warning messages because they're different items.
Okay.
But Benji, I think, was suggesting that there be only one.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that. So it would be good if there's errors, that there would be only an error message, and the warning message would only be visible if there's no errors at all.
So does that mean, like, if say something like if you didn't have the latest database update, that was an error, and then these file permissions were a warning. So here you would just see there's some, readiness checkers, something about go to the status report, and then a summary of, you have, database updates that are applied or something like that. Then no mention of the actual warning about the file permissions.
I wouldn't say no mention. Just I don't want to have a separate error message and warning message in the status message area.
Yeah.
Just give me the error message and add to the error message a short mention that there are also warnings. And that the details
so
are
then we
obviously.
wouldn't include the message that multiple files appear to have been modified, because that wouldn't be an error, that would be a warning. We would just summarize that with, there are also warnings.
That's my suggestion.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I agree, +1.
So, I mean, what if we had like an error message that said your site does not pass readiness checks, and then listed, and if there were both, I guess if there were one error and one warning, both put them in the error area, because the general thing is an error that you won't be able to do updates.
Yeah, list the errors from the checkers.
Okay.
And then if there are also warnings, have one line saying there are
Okay.
also warnings.
Okay. All right.
I just hate losing, like, from years of being a site builder, there are many times where I have not been able to address an error, but knowing whether or not my files had been modified is more important than knowing that I have to update a module I can't update. And I mean, that's just from a security standpoint as a site owner, that's a pretty significant regression in terms of information availability.
I mean, you could see it on the status report.
Right, but again, the pattern of behavior is you go into a website, you're administrator, you administrate X number of sites. When you see an error warning come up because of the way updating works on the site, you always see it. If that overrides anything that would be more immediate, like this is an instance where the warning is more important to me as a site owner than the error, because the assumption is that all errors are more important than warnings. But for me, when I want to know whether or not someone has modified one of my files, that would be the more important thing. And it's just, there's an inherent assumption of saying we can summarize and say go elsewhere to look at the warning. If you don't see a state change that's very clear, if it said, if we changed it from error warning or error message to error and warning messages so that it visibly changed in some way that made it very obvious, it's just been my experience that it ends up being noise when you know you can't update something. And I've been in the situation where, because of things upstream from a module you can't update because of some conflict and you're stuck in that state, we don't have the ability to just check a box and say, I know. The error message just keeps on showing up, and then you become numb to the fact that that error message is on all your pages and you stop acting upon it. Whereas something like this, you definitely need to act upon immediately. It's, again, like, I don't know if we can do anything about it. I'm just trying to put out there that I think that we're making certain assumptions in what is the priority.
So
Yeah,
Thomas, what if the summary message said there are also warnings from, and then list the checkers that have warnings in addition to the error?
That would address the issue. I just don't want to lose the information and summarize it into something that just doesn't give me an indication of how bad the situation is. Like, that's, I want to know immediately my files have changed, and anything that hides that from me is as an undesirable effect.
Yeah.
So one question that I have from this, right now in the status report, we have things split out into errors and warnings. So that means if we just have one link, just in errors, presumably we're going to link to the area around the errors, but you'll also have to scroll down to the warning section to see the warnings. Does that make sense to everyone?
That would be okay with me.
Yeah, to me, that seems kind of, I mean, I don't know, I guess it's not how we do status, it's not how we do status reports usually, but to me, I mean, I would love that all of the messages regarded to like the problems with updating all or in the one place. But I guess if we had errors and warnings, then the pattern isn't to put all of the related information in the same place. We always separate them by severity.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the only way we could have them all in the same place is if we created a separate page for it.
Because I think one possibility is you would just look at the errors. I mean, especially if the messages, if the warnings weren't at the top of the warnings, you'd fix all the errors without having looked down below. And you think, oh, I'm good to go. But then, you know, the purpose of the warning messages is to tell you, like, definitely this will pop, you know, it's definitely a possibility these things will stop your updates. And you don't, you know, you don't scroll, like you just look at the errors and then all of a sudden they're gone. And you're like, cool, I've addressed everything. But then you don't scroll down to see like, oh, you know, I didn't realize there was this other problem, which, you know, it's still a possibility to stop my automatic updates.
Yeah, which once you run the check again after you cleared out the errors, you should then see the warnings message at the top.
Of the warning section.
Yeah. Or sorry, at the top of the page if you run the check again.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Okay, I'd like to get some opinions from other people on this page. So a couple of things, like we're adding to the core update status. I guess you've already thought that that's something that can be implemented. So then the question is whether that's a good idea or whether we want to have a separate section. And also, Lowry warned us in advance he'd have to drop after 30 minutes, and he did. But Ofer Schall has joined us. Ofer, do you need any catch up on the issue we're discussing?
No, I'm looking at it. I think I follow.
So Benji, when you say separate section, do you mean like totally separate, like route page?
No, I'm just wondering whether we should be adding on to the information from Drupal core update status, or whether we should have our own update readiness checks or whatever that is. Oh, and we usually read the issue number for the purpose of the recording. So does someone have that handy?
Yeah, so the core issue is 3162655.
Thanks. And again, Ted and Emily and I should stop talking for a few minutes and let other people give their impressions of this page. If anyone's trying to give an opinion, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I think one of the problems that you can get with the status message page for the warning area is that sometimes that area can get very noisy. For example, if you've got the web form module installed, for no good reason that I can see, it sticks like 19 warnings in there to do with external libraries that web form depends on. So you could have a very noisy area there. Going back to the other screen as well, the upgrade status screen, there was debate about one link or two links, or whether, you know, which checkers to reference and that sort of thing. I think it would be advantageous to include a clear link there to the status message page where the warnings and errors are going to be readable.
Yeah, I think that is the plan. When I suggested having just one link in that message, that link would come to this page.
Right, I missed that part. Sorry.
So just to be clear, that the sort of summarized page that we were looking at, the messages on the top, that would appear on all or most admin pages, and that sort of follows the. It's not. We may have been showing it on a particular page, but the pattern in the update module say for available updates or security updates is to show it on all admin pages, and we're basically showing it in all those same places.
Oh, so I was thinking that was the message you got after running the checks, but this is going to be like the message that your version of Drupal is insecure. It's going to show up on every admin page. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And the thought there is that people are going to rely on this for security updates. So if you're in a state where the next security update won't apply or likely won't apply, like it's something you need to address, like right now. Yeah, that was the thought, is that should be on par with like you have security updates available.
Okay,
Yeah,
then all the more
essentially-
important that we keep it short. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add on, essentially the idea is that people will set this and forget about it. So we need to let them know if something comes up.
Oh, so once they set it up, the checks are run on Cron or something?
Yeah. Yeah, and hopefully, like if your file permissions are good and you have like everything set up, you just won't ever see those warnings.
Got it. Any other suggestions for this page? Like my question of whether it's a good idea to combine it with the core update status?
So just to be clear on that, is that if you look at the top one, so that's an error there. On the top, we have what would be an existing core update message, like you're not secure, you have a security update available, which I guess is kind of weird, and then that hopefully you wouldn't see that message if updates are running correctly.
Right.
But,
yeah. So in the case if an update wasn't running correctly, then you would see that and you would see why or what was wrong. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Ted, if you were saying.
That was pretty much what I was.
Yeah, so if I've turned it on, I'll come here and I'll say, what, I'm not secure, but I enabled automatic updates. So I guess that's a good reason for having the message in the same place. That, you know, the reason I'm seeing this is that there was something preventing the upgrade.
And we haven't gotten to this part of the core module, but I imagine we'll also probably have some sort of error at some point saying like an update was attempted and it failed. Like all of these are all readiness, like these aren't like we updated and it failed. This is like an update probably won't apply or definitely won't apply.
So it sounds like it does make sense to people for this to be in Drupal core update status.
I hear no objections. Again, if anyone is objecting, you're muted. Shall we talk about how to present the information from the different checkers? If there are messages from multiple checkers?
Sure.
And I guess, Emily, you didn't like the idea of nested details elements. So I guess you're suggesting one detail element for each checker initially closed.
Yeah, I think that would make sense because in Claro, we don't, at least there, we don't have a pattern for the nested checker inside, or the nested details inside of this already existing details element. I think it's probably just going to get really tight and confusing.
Okay. Seems reasonable and not overwhelming to have one closed detail for each checker. And as Paul mentioned, we know that this can get overwhelming, and maybe someone should file an issue with the web form module. Maybe there's already an issue that it should take up a little less room on this page.
Paul, do you know if those are separate entries, like, or one big section that has a bunch of messages?
Hi there, I've got it open here. Let me just try and describe it to you. Yeah, so comparably, if we look at the screenshot that you've got there where it says Drupal status message, there's a similar title there for web form external libraries. And as you there have a line for each of these items that are not passing readiness checks, there's a rather more verbose entry for each of these web form libraries that may or may not be needed. The silly thing is here, even if you've got these libraries installed, all of these entries with web form show anyway. It's just taking over the, taking over the status report page for things that should be in the web form config area of the module, really.
Right, but we're not going to fix that today. So
No, sure, yeah.
Jacob Rockowitz is going to be responsible for that.
No, I was just describing it to you. It's it's a big deal.
I think we've probably all seen that. Okay, I don't know that we need any more discussion on this page.
Okay. Then there was one other thing other than messages that I just wanted to check on with patterns. And that's for, let's see, oh, not there. It's here. So let's see, right now, in the module, we have this section, and this is in the contrib module. So you can choose enable automatic updates of Drupal core via cron. And if this isn't checked, then this isn't visible, the enable security updates. Wait, let's see. Let me pull up a local site just to actually show what's really there.
We still see the same screenshot.
Yeah, sorry, I'm adding it. I just well, everyone will get an example of what it looks like with all of the crazy warnings.
There we go.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so right now there's this box which enables Drupal core updates via cron. And this one then opens up to enable security only updates, which I think would restrict you to only the security updates, not generally updating core, which seemed confusing because you would think that because that's a subset that this would be something extra if you're checking two boxes. So I was suggesting that we change this to to a radio button. So enable security automatic updates or enable all core automatic updates. But I was wondering what people think of those two patterns and if that makes sense.
If anyone is offering opinions, you're muted.
Putting security first makes more sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think the contrib module could make it a little bit better just by changing the wording. Instead of enable security only, say only enable security. But yeah, I think it's even better to do it the way you're suggesting, to you know, make the first checkbox the security one, and then if that's enabled, also offer the option of doing all updates. Although that help text looks rather excessive.
Yeah, I didn't make any updates to the help text. So
Okay.
okay, thanks. So I think that's everything that I had. If no one has any more comments on this.
I had one other issue for the core stuff if people have time.
Yeah, there's still 10 minutes left in
Alrighty.
the schedule.
I'll share my screen.
10 minutes
So
is certainly not enough time to switch to a totally different issue.
it's kind of a totally different issue, but same module.
Okay.
So this is the message from the contrib module. So this area here, the public service announcements. Wait, am I not sharing? Yeah. Can people see this part?
Yes.
I think in the core module, we've changed this to public security advisories. But the question I had was if there's an error attempting to get this from Drupal.org. So if there are no, like 99% of the time, there'll be no critical security advisories that are going to be put in this feed. It's a feed from Drupal.org, and I think it's been around for like a year and there hasn't been anything put in that feed. But if there's something super critical, especially if it's one of the cases where they announce like a few days before there's going to be a critical security update and we want people to update right away. I guess, I don't know a better way to call it, but I guess what people call Drupal-geddon, those type of ones. So not even like just critical security updates, like highly critical ones. So 99% of the time you will see nothing here, but occasionally, every few years you might see something. But every time we run the status report, or maybe every few hours, not every time you run it, but every few hours we'll check. And it could be that there's a problem and there's no connection to Drupal.org and we don't get anything. So there was a debate in the core issue of whether we should report that at all, because maybe it's not really actionable by the admin if the connection to Drupal.org wasn't successful. I guess my concern with that is it could be a problem on your side. So I guess it's hard to tell sometimes if it's like, is it a firewall setting on your side that's stopping you from making a request to this particular feed on Drupal.org? That's probably less likely. But if we don't show you any message here, then you wouldn't know to check. So the current idea we have in core is to just put that to log there, but not put anything here. But another option we were thinking of is to always put a message here that says, could not retrieve security advisories from Drupal.org or something like that. But I guess the problem with that is what is the action to take then?
I mean, you want to tell people because otherwise they would think that there's no PSA to display.
Yeah.
Right?
Another thing we were thinking of is like displaying the message if it failed like 3 times in a row or something. Like if it failed.
Did
Jess,
Jess
you
cut out?
muted yourself. By the way, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, my cat muted me. Sorry, I meant to make the Emmy's demo also, but I just woke up. So we were thinking of like if the HTTP request to D.O to the JSON feed failed multiple times, then displaying it on the status report here. An existing pattern we have in Core is what the update module itself does. The update module will tell you if it was unable to check for updates, and we could use like whatever the same pattern and internal logic for that is. Like if you get it, Ted, can you just click on the update status report? It'll probably show us since you're
Available updates.
Yeah. Oh, but you did actually run it because you were, yeah, check manually.
I mean, click that.
But yeah, it'll probably work though. Oh, neat.
Well,
But yeah, this is an excellent model of site usability.
This is the one. This is the one we were talking about fixing before. Checked available update data report.
So never mind, this is not a good pattern. But I think when it's unable to check updates, there's a message here. And we were talking about, I feel like if the request failed once, you might not know, but if it fails 3 times, so that'd be like a day and a half or even twice in a row, then that means that it's not just Drupal.org, barfing. It's it might be an ongoing problem the site owner needs to contact their network administrator to fix or something, right? And so the question is like, even if we display a message, what we would want to give them in like instructions about like how to figure out what the problem is. So we log the exact log the exact exception message. But we would also, people say things like contact your network administrator or something, because it could be that they're, a host configuration, or it could be a problem with Drupal.org, and it depends on the exception.
I guess one other concern we had is that if there was a hiccup, like a momentary hiccup on Drupal.org, if we display an error message on the first time, that would potentially in the future mean that every site that has auto update, or every site, because we're not really giving an easy way to opt out of this because it's critical security advisories. Every Drupal site in the world would have a message about an error connection to Drupal.org. So that's one of the reasons I think why we want to do the 3 tries.
So I guess a couple of things. The wording could say something like, if this error persists, then try to do something about it. The other thing is that there's one easy actionable thing, which is to give a link to the page so that they can check manually.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Well, right now there is not a separate page to check manually.
Yeah, there is. It's the
Sorry, the actual page. I thought you meant a page inside Drupal.org. Yeah. So the page on
Drupal.org/security or something.
Yeah.
The public service announcements is already linked, but we could link in a second time on the right side and say, 3 attempts to check for security advisories failed. review the public service announcements manually. And that text could be linked or something along those lines.
One difference would be, though, if their feed, so if their connection was successful, they would likely not see anything. If their connection's unsuccessful 3 times and we give them a link, they would see announcements that they would not see here.
Well, they still can see them by clicking on the left column, but it's
Okay.
I mean, like a wordier version would be, and wordy's bad, but like the total information that we might want to give them is, 3 attempts to contact Drupal.org to check for public service announcements failed. Contact your network administrator, or review the error logs, and which is a link, and view the public service announcements in case there is a critical announcement or something. I don't know. I mean, like in a way, if it's like perma broken, then they permanently need to manually look at the public service announcements feed anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And it looks like that link you just opened says what public service announcements are.
That's
But I
that's
think
the contrib module. That's not what core. Sorry, I don't have the core patch applied to this site.
okay, we're actually going to link to the page that has the public service announcements.
Yeah. Okay, so the idea now is do the 3 message on the, like, whatever the current pattern is in the update module for check for updates. Like if they check 3 times and then give a warning, we'll do the same thing. Or 3 times, the 3rd fail. So I guess if security updates currently does check 3 times, if the 3rd time is a failed attempt, all 3 are failed attempts, then we give a message. And we'll follow whatever the current update module does.
I think so.
Okay.
And
Sounds
I
good.
don't know that the update module actually does that. I think that, but like if it does, then we can follow that pattern.
It does something like that. I'll have to see if there's definitely, like, it records the tries. I'll see what it does with it. All right.
And like thinking about so 3 attempts is the default value of 12 hours, and that 95% of sites will have, because it's not exposed as a UI configuration option. And the maximum time it could have been since the 4th time would mean that you'd be like, 47 hours and 59 minutes since the last check. And I'm just thinking about whether that's sufficient time before disclosure. Usually, if we have something that we know is bad that we're going to publish, we usually post the PSA on Monday for the security window on Wednesday. But I think there've also been times in the past where we didn't have quite as much notice, and we only had like about 24 hours notice.
I'll have to check the code that I did. I was thinking that the check frequency would be successful checks. Like you wouldn't check 12 hours, you wouldn't wait 12 hours if your last one was unsuccessful.
I see. Well, I mean, I guess does the check happen on Cron, or?
Yep.
I'm sorry, I haven't gotten that far yet.
Yep.
Yeah, so we're also dependent on their cron run configuration there. Like it's the, if their cron run is only every 11 hours, and so it might wait up to 23 hours to check. So maybe like we should reduce it to twice in a row. The problem with that, though, is that, that increases the likelihood of it being like a false positive from Drupal.org issues. But do we know, like, is there a default cron configuration of how often cron runs?
There must be, I mean, because you don't have to set it when you install.
Yeah, there's like a poor man's cron thing that's built into Drupal.
Yeah, I'll check there must be a, anyways, we're over
We
time.
can figure that out in the issue of like
Yeah.
how long it is and stuff, but
Yeah.
Yeah, and we might need some help on the messaging on it.
Yep. The interval is 10,080, whatever that is.
Let's divide that by
3 hours.
3,600. Yeah.
3 hours. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So by default, then it would be, you know, at most 47 hours. And well, no, if we do it, if it fails and we check it on cron 3 times, that would be 9 hours.
Yeah.
I can see Drupal.org having an outage that long of the PSA feed, like it's just down it's broken for a day. So we might want to discuss in the issue, like do have a couple scenarios that we discuss in the issue of how long
But
it
also,
is to pick the magic number.
But also, if you're an attacker and you knew there was a security update coming, attacking
Feed
that
us
feed,
all this Drupal
attacking that feed would be a good
Yep.
thing. So you might want to warn people so that they would figure out other ways to figure out if there is one.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
We should ask Neil too.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I'll try to get the recording of this meeting posted later today.
Great. Thanks, Benji.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. And again, we're not going to have a meeting on Christmas or New Year's, so hope to see many of you again in 3 weeks.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
All right.